Captain Elias Ward's boots crunched softly on the cracked earth beneath him as he moved through the dense jungle of the war-torn planet. His face was grim, his jaw clenched with the tension of the mission. The alien forces, known as the Vorathians, had already spread their brutal empire across the galaxy, and the humans were fighting desperately to stop them. Elias had seen it all, the destruction, the chaos, the innocent lives lost. But today, his mission was different. Today, he was behind enemy lines, far from the safety of his ship and his comrades. The Vorathian capital loomed in the distance, a towering city of gleaming black spires and massive mechanical structures. But Elias wasn't here for sightseeing. He was here to destroy a weapon so powerful that if it fell into the wrong hands, it would wipe out human colonies in a heartbeat. He had to stop it, no matter the cost. Elias knew the risks, but he didn't expect what was coming next. He didn't expect to meet her. A rustling sound from behind a cluster of alien trees caught his attention. Elias froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm strapped to his waist. His heart hammered in his chest, and he crouched low, scanning the area for any movement. His fingers brushed the trigger, but he hesitated. There was something different about this place, something unfamiliar. A figure stepped out from behind the trees. It was her, the alien princess Lyanna. Elias had heard rumors of her, stories whispered among the human resistance. The daughter of the Vorathian emperor, a ruthless leader who had crushed countless worlds under his boot. But Lyanna was no ordinary princess. She was different, and Elias had seen enough to know that the truth was more complicated than anyone could have imagined. She stood tall and elegant, her violet eyes scanning the jungle with a mix of caution and curiosity. Her skin glistened with a soft glow, the color of polished silver, and her long, flowing hair shimmered like liquid moonlight. Elias felt his breath catch in his throat as she approached, her movements graceful yet deliberate. For a moment he couldn't help but admire her beauty, even in the midst of this brutal conflict. "Elias Ward," she said, her voice soft but firm, carrying the weight of authority. "I've been expecting you." The sound of her voice brought him back to reality. He tensed, his mind racing. How did she know his name? And why was she here? This was not a chance encounter. Lyanna had come to him with a purpose, and he wasn't sure whether that purpose was to kill him or offer him something else. "I don't know what you want," Elias said, his voice low and guarded. "But if you think you can use me to get to the humans, you're mistaken." Lyanna smiled, a small but knowing curve of her lips. "I'm not here to use you, Captain Ward. I'm here to offer you a choice." Elias took a step back, his fingers still tight around the grip of his weapon. He didn't trust her. How could he? She was the daughter of the alien emperor, the same empire that had ravaged countless worlds and destroyed everything Elias held dear. But something in her gaze, something in the way she spoke, made him hesitate. There was no malice in her eyes, only a deep, almost sad understanding. "A choice," Elias repeated, his voice thick with skepticism. "What choice?" Lyanna stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I want to end this war. I want to take down my father." Elias blinked in disbelief. "You're telling me that the daughter of the Vorathian emperor wants to betray her own father?" "It's not betrayal if it's the right thing to do," Lyanna replied, her voice steady, though there was an underlying edge of pain in her tone. "My father's empire is built on blood and fear. I've seen it from the inside, Elias. I've seen the suffering. I can't continue to live in the shadow of his cruelty." Elias felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't know what to believe. Everything he had been taught about the Vorathians told him to fight them, to destroy them without question. But here she was, an alien princess, one of the very people who had been his enemy for so long, and she was offering him a chance to end the war. "Why should I trust you?" Elias asked, his voice still cautious. "Why should I believe anything you say?" Lyanna's expression softened, and for a moment Elias saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything. I've lost my people, my home, and now I've lost my father too. The Vorathian Empire isn't what you think it is. It's not about glory or conquest. It's about control, and my father has taken that control too far. Elias studied her carefully, weighing her words. He had always known there was more to the war than met the eye, but he had never imagined this. A part of him wanted to believe her, but another part, the soldier inside him, told him not to get too close, not to let his guard down. He had seen enough to know that trusting the wrong person could get him killed. "You want me to help you overthrow your father?" Elias asked, his voice rough with uncertainty. "Yes," Lyanna said simply, "but I can't do it alone. I need your help, Elias. Together we can destroy the weapon that's being developed. Together we can end this war." Elias felt a weight settle on his chest as her words sank in. This wasn't just about stopping a weapon or winning a battle. This was about stopping an entire empire from continuing its reign of terror. If what she said was true, then this might be his only chance to change the tide of the war. But could he trust her? Could he really believe that she was on his side? "I'll help you," Elias said, his voice steady now. "But if you're lying to me, I'll make sure you regret it." Lyanna nodded, her expression resolute. "I wouldn't lie to you, Captain. I've made my choice. Now it's time for you to make yours." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their unspoken pact hanging in the air. Elias wasn't sure what the future held. But one thing was clear. His life had just taken an unexpected turn. And whatever happened next, he would have to rely on Lyanna, an alien princess who, against all odds, had turned out to be his greatest ally. Together, they would face the Empire, and together, they would see if they could change the fate of the galaxy. Elias and Lyanna stood in the dense jungle, the sounds of distant alien machinery and ships reverberating in the air. The wind stirred the leaves above them, a faint breeze that did little to cool the tension between them. Elias' heart still raced, the realization of what he was about to do weighing on him. He had agreed to help an alien princess, someone who had once been an enemy, someone whose people had caused so much destruction. But now, as they moved together through the wilderness, that line between enemy and ally was growing increasingly blurred. "Where are we heading?" Elias asked, his voice low as he kept a sharp eye on their surroundings. He couldn't let his guard down. Not yet. Not with everything on the line. Lyanna didn't look at him as she spoke. Her voice was steady, but Elias could hear the quiet resolve in it. "There's a hidden base just outside the city. It's where my father is developing the weapon. We have to destroy it." Elias glanced around, his instincts telling him that they were being watched. He had been trained for situations like this: stealth, combat, survival. He had always worked alone, trusted only himself and his fellow soldiers. But now, with Lyanna at his side, he had to adjust to the idea of trust. It wasn't easy. She was a princess, the daughter of the emperor who had caused the destruction of so many human colonies. But the look in her eyes, the sincerity, the pain told him that she wasn't like the rest of them. "You're sure about this?" Elias asked, his voice betraying a hint of doubt. "Destroying the weapon, it could be the only leverage your people have against mine." "I've seen what it does," Lyanna said, her voice cold. "My father wants to use it to annihilate entire planets. We can't let that happen." They moved quietly, the sound of their footsteps muted by the thick vegetation underfoot. Elias kept his hand close to his weapon, scanning every corner of the jungle, every rustling leaf for any sign of danger. The path ahead was uncertain. The further they went, the closer they came to the Vorathian stronghold, the heart of the Empire. And with it came the reality that they were both risking everything. Lyanna had already lost so much. Elias had his mission, but there was more than that now. A new sense of purpose was forming inside him. They walked for hours, the jungle growing denser with each step. Elias couldn't help but notice how different Lyanna seemed. At first, she had been an imposing figure, an alien princess, untouchable and distant. But now, as they ventured deeper into the jungle, Elias saw the cracks in that facade. There was a vulnerability to her, a certain fragility in the way she carried herself. She wasn't just the enemy anymore. She was a person, a woman fighting for her survival, for a future where her people were free. Eventually, they reached a clearing and Elias could see the faint outline of a structure in the distance. It was small but heavily guarded. Lyanna paused, signaling for Elias to stop. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "We have to move quickly," she said. "There are patrols in the area. If they spot us, we'll be trapped." Elias nodded, his mind already calculating the best approach. They couldn't risk being seen. He had no idea how many guards were stationed at the base, but he knew it wouldn't be an easy mission. Still, he trusted Lyanna. For some reason, that trust felt stronger than the fear that was building in him. They moved through the underbrush, careful to stay low and avoid detection. Elia's heart pounded as they neared the base. The structure was heavily fortified, with guards posted around the perimeter. Elias couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. "Once we get inside, we'll have to find the control room," Lyanna whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's where the weapon is being housed." Elia's fingers tightened around his weapon as they moved closer. He felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This was no longer just about following orders. It was about the future. It was about doing what was right, even if it meant risking everything. They reached the edge of the base, the guards now within sight. Elias motioned for Lyanna to stay behind him as he moved forward, his body low and his movements calculated. The guards were focused on the entrance, their attention not fully on the area where Elias and Lyanna were hiding. "On my mark," Elias whispered. He checked the ammunition in his weapon, ensuring it was ready. Lyanna nodded, her face determined. They were a team now, and there was no turning back. 3, 2, 1. Elias darted forward, quickly taking down the first guard with a swift, quiet motion. Lyanna followed closely, her movements equally precise. The two of them worked in perfect synchronization, each of them knowing their role without needing to speak. They moved like shadows, slipping past the guards and into the heart of the base. Inside, the air was cold and sterile, the sharp hum of alien technology filling the silence. Elia's senses were heightened as they moved through the narrow corridors, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The weapon was somewhere in here, hidden among the maze of control rooms and laboratories, and they were running out of time. "We need to find the main control room," Lyanna said, her voice tense. "It's where the weapon is kept. We can't waste any time." Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the walls for any sign of where to go. The structure was unfamiliar to him, but Lyanna seemed to know exactly where to lead him. It was clear that she had spent years learning the inner workings of her father's empire. She had once been a part of it, but now she was working against it. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a group of guards. Elias and Lyanna froze for a split second, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. But they were quick, too quick for the guards to react. Elias took down two of them in the blink of an eye, his training taking over. Lyanna disarmed another with a swift, graceful movement, her face showing no fear, only determination. But as they moved deeper into the base, Elias felt the weight of their situation growing heavier. They were close now, too close, and he could feel the danger closing in on them. They had no choice but to continue forward. Finally, they reached the control room. It was just as Lyanna had described, high-tech, filled with screens and alien machinery. The weapon was there, its immense power radiating from the core of the facility. Elia's heart skipped a beat as he saw it, the glowing device that could destroy entire worlds. "This is it," Lyanna said, her voice barely a whisper. "We need to disable it before my father can use it." Elias moved quickly, setting charges around the core of the weapon. He glanced at Lyanna, her face etched with worry. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a fighter, a leader, and together they would make sure that this weapon never saw the light of day. "Pull the trigger softly," Elias said, his voice steady. He turned to Lyanna, giving her one final nod. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then with a deep breath she did what she had to do. The weapon was disabled, its power drained in an instant. The mission was a success. But as the room began to shake, the sound of alarms blaring in the distance, Elias knew that this was just the beginning. The war wasn't over. The fight had only just begun. The alarms blared through the corridors, the sound harsh and relentless as the base began to tremble beneath them. Elia's heart raced, and he could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The mission had been a success, but now they had a new problem: getting out alive. "We need to move," Elias said, his voice steady but urgent. He turned to Lyanna, who stood by the now-disabled weapon, her face taut with determination. She nodded, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of movement. They were running out of time. The weight of what they had just done hung heavy in the air. Elias had seen the destruction that weapon could cause, and for a moment a small part of him was relieved. They had stopped it before it could do any damage. But as the alarms continued to scream around them, he knew that their fight was far from over. Lyanna moved swiftly, taking the lead as they navigated through the twisting hallways. The base was a maze, and the further they went, the more guarded it became. Elias kept his senses sharp, his hand resting lightly on the grip of his weapon. He could hear the sound of approaching footsteps, the shuffling of guards who had been alerted to their presence. They had to be careful. The last thing they needed was to be trapped in this place. "Elias," Lyanna whispered, her voice low, "the exit is on the other side of the base. We'll have to make it through the security checkpoints." Elias glanced at her, his mind working quickly. Security checkpoints. That meant more guards, more obstacles, but they couldn't turn back now. He couldn't afford to think about what might happen if they failed. The mission wasn't just about stopping a weapon. It was about breaking free from the chains of an empire that had caused so much pain. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows as they crossed through the halls. Elias could feel the tension building in his chest, his breathing steady but quick. The sound of footsteps grew louder. They were close, too close. "We need to go now," Elias muttered, his hand pulling Lyanna into a nearby alcove. They pressed themselves against the cold walls, staying as still as possible. Lyanna's breath was shallow, her eyes wide with the same urgency that Elias felt. They waited in silence, the sound of the approaching guards echoing through the corridor. The guards passed by, their footsteps heavy but unhurried. Elias held his breath, his muscles tense. He could feel his heart beating in his throat. They had barely avoided being caught. If they were discovered now, there would be no second chances. As the guards moved further down the hall, Elias motioned for Lyanna to follow him. They crept forward, moving as quietly as possible. Every step felt like a small eternity, every sound amplified in their ears. The exit was so close but so far away. It felt like they were trapped in a never-ending maze. "We're almost there," Lyanna whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just a little further." Elias nodded, his mind focused on the path ahead. They were close, but the closer they got to the exit, the more it felt like they were walking into a trap. The base was vast and the guards were everywhere. The closer they got to the heart of the empire, the more danger they would face. They rounded a corner and came face to face with another group of guards. This time, there was no room to hide. Elias acted quickly, pushing Lyanna behind him as he raised his weapon. The guards hadn't seen them yet, but they were getting too close. "Stay down," Elias hissed. He took aim, his fingers tight on the trigger. His breath came in shallow bursts as his eyes locked onto the nearest guard. He was ready. He had to be. Lyanna held her breath, her body pressed against the cold stone wall. Elias could see the tension in her posture. She was a princess, someone who had never known the kind of danger he faced every day. But now they were in this together. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. They were partners. The first guard turned, his eyes widening in shock as he saw them. Elias didn't hesitate. He fired, his aim true, and the guard crumpled to the floor in an instant. The others reacted quickly, reaching for their weapons, but Elias was faster. He fired again, and the second guard fell. Lyanna moved with fluid precision, disarming a third guard before he could react. The sound of their struggle echoed through the base, and Elias knew they didn't have much time. The rest of the guards would be on their way. They had to keep moving. Lyanna wiped the sweat from her brow, her face a mixture of determination and exhaustion. "We can't keep fighting like this," she said, her voice sharp. "We need to get out of here. Now." Elias nodded, already moving forward. They had no choice. If they stayed too long, they would be overwhelmed. They had to reach the exit before the entire base was on alert. They moved quickly through the halls, bypassing more guards as they made their way toward the exit. The security checkpoints were just ahead, but the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. Elias' pulse quickened. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. This wasn't just about survival. It was about stopping an empire from destroying everything. "We're almost there," Elias said, his voice low and focused. "Stay close." Lyanna stayed at his side, her eyes scanning their surroundings as they approached the final checkpoint. The guards there would be tougher, more experienced. Elias knew they couldn't take them on in a head-to-head battle. They had to be smart. "We'll have to disable the security system," Lyanna said, her voice filled with resolve. "I know how to do it. My father's systems are complicated, but I can access the back door." Elias hesitated. "Are you sure?" Lyanna looked at him, her expression unwavering. "I'm sure." Without another word, she moved forward, her fingers flying over a panel embedded in the wall. Elias kept watch, his eyes darting between the guards and Lyanna. The seconds felt like hours as she worked, the tension thick in the air. Finally, with a soft beep, the security system shut down. Lyanna turned to him, a triumphant smile on her face. "It's done." Elias didn't waste a second. He motioned for her to follow him as they made their way to the final checkpoint. There were no more guards in their path. They had made it. The exit doors loomed ahead, the bright light of the outside world spilling through. Elias felt a rush of relief flood over him. They had done it. They had completed the mission. But as they stepped outside, the reality of what they had done hit him. The mission wasn't over. The war wasn't over. And the most dangerous part was still to come. Elias and Lyanna stood on the edge of the base, looking out at the sprawling landscape before them. The base was behind them now, but the empire still loomed large in the distance. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Elias felt a flicker of hope. "We did it," Lyanna said, her voice quiet but filled with something Elias hadn't expected, relief. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This is just the beginning." They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The future was uncertain and the road ahead would be long. But for now, they had each other. And that was enough to keep moving forward. Elias and Lyanna stood at the edge of the dense jungle, the cold night air wrapping around them like a blanket. The base they had just escaped was now behind them, but the battle was far from over. The sound of their footsteps was drowned out by the silence that had settled over the landscape. For a moment, they both stood still, absorbing the weight of what they had just done. "We made it out," Lyanna said, her voice quieter than usual. She looked out at the distant horizon, where the lights of the Vorathian Empire flickered in the distance, like the eyes of a predator waiting in the dark. Elias didn't respond right away. He could feel the tension in his chest, the fear of what might come next. He had done what he set out to do, destroying the weapon that could wipe out human colonies. But that was just one part of a much larger plan. The Vorathian Empire was vast, and they had no way of knowing how long it would take before the Emperor sent his forces after them. "We can't rest yet," Elias said finally, his voice firm but tired. We still have to figure out how to get the rest of the information to the Resistance. Lyanna nodded, her brow furrowing. I know, but for now we need to get to a safe location. I have a place, an old ally who might be able to help us. Elias glanced at her, his mind working through their options. Lead the way, he said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. They couldn't stay out here forever, and the danger of being caught was still very real. But for the first time since he had met Lyanna, he felt a flicker of hope. The mission wasn't over, but the tide was beginning to shift. They moved quickly through the jungle, careful not to make any noise that might draw attention. Elias knew that every second counted. The Vorathian forces wouldn't let them go easily. They would be searching for any sign of the princess and the human soldier who had helped her. It wouldn't be long before their escape was discovered. As they walked, Elias couldn't help but notice the way Lyanna moved. She was no longer just the princess of an alien empire. She was a fighter, a survivor. Her determination was clear in every step she took, and Elias couldn't deny the respect he had for her. She had done what he hadn't thought possible. She had betrayed her father's empire to stop the war. It wasn't something many would dare to do. And yet here she was, standing beside him. We're close, Lyanna said, breaking the silence. Her voice had taken on a sharper edge. We just have to make it through the pass and we'll be there. Elias nodded. They were getting closer to safety, but the journey ahead was still dangerous. Every step could bring them closer to a trap. Every corner could hold a hidden enemy. They had to stay alert. He had to stay focused. He couldn't afford to let anything go wrong now. As they moved through the jungle, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He kept his hand close to his weapon, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. It was impossible to know if they were truly alone or if the Vorathians had already caught their trail. The silence of the jungle was unnerving, the quiet before the storm. They came to the edge of a narrow mountain pass, the rocky walls on either side casting long shadows. Lyanna led the way, moving swiftly and silently, as if she had walked this path 1,000 times before. Elias followed closely behind her, his every step calculated, his senses on high alert. They reached a small, secluded clearing, hidden from view by the towering mountains. In the center of the clearing stood a small cabin, its windows dark and its door closed. Lyanna approached it carefully, knocking on the door 3 times, each knock short and deliberate. Elias stood back, watching the shadows around them, ready for anything. The door creaked open and a man stepped out, his face hidden in the darkness. Elias immediately tensed, his hand reaching for his weapon, but Lyanna stepped forward, a small smile on her lips. "It's all right," she said, her voice calm. "He's one of the few I can trust." The man stepped into the light, revealing his face. He was older than Elias, his hair graying at the temples, and his eyes were sharp, filled with a mixture of caution and curiosity. He looked at Lyanna for a moment before his gaze shifted to Elias. "I didn't expect to see you here, Princess," he said, his voice gravelly. "But I can see you've brought company." Lyanna nodded. "We need your help, Ryan. We've disabled the weapon, but there's still much to do. The Vorathian Empire won't stop until they have us both." Ryan's eyes flickered with recognition and he nodded grimly. "Come inside. We can talk there." The inside of the cabin was small but well kept. A fire crackled in the hearth and a small table sat in the center of the room. Lyanna and Elias sat down, Ryan joining them after a moment of hesitation. "I've been following the Resistance's movements," Ryan said, his eyes scanning Elias. "I know what you've done, and I know what's at stake, but if we're going to make it through this, we need to act fast." Elias met Ryan's gaze. "We have information about the Vorathian fleet. They're planning to attack one of the human colonies. We need to warn them." Ryan nodded, his expression serious. "I'll get the message to the right people, but it won't be easy. The Vorathians have spies everywhere. Even the Resistance is vulnerable." Lyanna's face hardened. "Then we'll have to move quickly. We can't waste time." Elias looked at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. She wasn't just the princess of a fallen empire anymore. She was a leader, someone willing to fight for what was right, even if it meant betraying everything she had known. Elias had been skeptical of her at first, but now he saw the strength and courage she had. It was the same strength that had kept him alive all these years. "Do you think we can stop them?" Elias asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Lyanna met his gaze, her eyes fierce. "We have to. It's the only way." The conversation continued into the night, their plans taking shape. Ryan offered what resources he had, and Elias and Lyanna discussed their next moves carefully. The road ahead was long, and the Vorathians were relentless, but for the first time, Elias believed that victory was possible. By morning, they had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was all they had, and it was enough to give them hope. Lyanna stood up, ready to face whatever came next. "We'll need to move out as soon as we can. The sooner we act, the better our chances." Elias nodded. He was tired physically and mentally, but the mission wasn't over. The fight for freedom, for a future without the tyranny of the Vorathian Empire, had only just begun. As he stood next to Lyanna, looking out at the distant mountains, Elias knew that this was more than just a battle. This was a war. A war for the future of humanity, for the future of all those who had suffered under the rule of an empire that cared nothing for the lives it destroyed. But as long as he stood by Lyanna's side, he believed they could win.